Bob Dylan's music and beliefs have been a mystery for many years. Growing up in an Orthodox Jewish family, nobody could have foreseen his radical conversion to Christianity in the late 1970s. His metamorphosis startled admirers and provoked contentious discussions. Why did he decide to take such a drastic step? Was it a flash of divine inspiration? Or had his poems always hinted to something deeper? Since Dylan has rarely discussed his beliefs openly, learning the truth requires delving into his words, music, and hidden meanings. Join us as we investigate the cause of Bob Dylan's unexpected religious conversion. Early life roots. Bob Dylan was born Robert Allen Zimmerman on May 24, 1941, in Duluth, Minnesota, and raised in Hibbing, a tiny mining town. His family had a history of survival and tenacity, and his parents, Abram and Beatrice Zimmerman, were steeped in Jewish customs. In 1905, Zygmunt and Anna Zimmerman, his paternal grandparents, left Odessa, Ukraine to avoid violent anti-Semitic pogroms. In 1902, Benjamin and Liva Edelstein, his maternal grandparents, likewise fled Lithuania for the United States in search of opportunity and safety. These immigrant struggles influenced the worldview Dylan would later examine in his lyrics. Dylan went to a Hebrew school in Hibbing, which had a small Jewish community despite being primarily Catholic. But there was always a restlessness about him, a desire to see beyond his community. His insatiable curiosity about the world was evident even in his early years and would eventually be reflected in his music and ongoing self-reinvention. Bar Mitzvah Milestone. On May 22, 1954, 13-year-old Robert Zimmerman celebrated his bar mitzvah in front of his family and community at the Agudath Achim Synagogue in Hibbing. For any Jewish boy, the occasion signaled the beginning of his journey into Jewish adulthood. He read from the Torah, demonstrating his fluency in Hebrew, which resulted from years of religious education. There was music and typical Jewish food for the party, which was probably hosted in his house or a nearby venue. This event in his life was vital since it linked him to generations of Jewish tradition, even though he later underwent religious changes. Interestingly, the family's commitment to upholding their faith was hinted at by rumors that, years later, Dylan's parents hired a traveling rabbi for a second, more lavish bar mitzvah celebration in Duluth. Despite Dylan's subsequent exploration of Christianity, this formative event in his early life played a significant role in his narrative. Musical awakening. As a teenager, Dylan was enthralled with early rock and roll, blues, and folk music. He started several bands while he was a student at Hibbing High School, such as the Golden Chords and the Shadow Blasters, and they covered Little Richard, Elvis Presley, and Buddy Holly songs. Dylan's attendance at a Buddy Holly concert in Duluth in 1959, a few days before Holly's untimely death, was a turning point. Holly looked right at me during the performance, which Dylan subsequently recounted as a moment that changed his life. These early encounters stoked his yearning to escape small-town life. He was renowned for his unwavering determination, frequently practicing music late into the night and trying many genres. Dylan had a grander dream, something revolutionary than his peers, who were happy to play small gigs. His musical roots went beyond simple amusement. They were about revolt, expression, and the start of a lifetime quest for artistic change. University days. Dylan enrolled at the University of Minnesota in September 1959 with a major in arts, but he was more interested in the city's folk music scene than academics. Most of his time was spent in Dinkytown, a bohemian community home to many singers, writers, and beatniks. Dylan swiftly established himself as a frequent performer in coffee shops, such as the 10 O'Clock Scholar, where he absorbed the mannerisms of Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie while performing folk and blues covers. In sharp contrast to the smoother crooners of the day, he initially tried out his nasally, twangy vocal style here. In addition, he started writing original songs, gradually refining the poetic narrative that would come to characterize his work. It's interesting to note that Dylan was notorious for exaggerating his life story even back then, occasionally claiming to have been an orphan or escaped from a circus. Even though his stay in Minneapolis was short, It was significant because it was the final destination before his fate led him to New York City. Name transformation. In an attempt to change his name, Robert Zimmerman gave up his given name and changed it to Bob Dylan. Despite what many people think, Dylan did not name himself after the Welsh poet Dylan Thomas, whom he said he did not admire much. Instead, he was attracted to the name Dylan, which he attributed to his love of beatnik culture and an old TV character named Mad Dylan. "I had this feeling that you can be anybody you want to be," he once said. The name change was symbolic, a step toward becoming a legendary character in American music and a proclamation of independence from his small-town upbringing. His father, in particular, who had hoped for a more traditional career route for him, was perplexed by his choice. However, Dylan was already creating his mythology, laying the groundwork for a character that would constantly change and have people wondering who the actual Bob Dylan was. New York arrival. With just his guitar and a strong desire to meet his idol, Woody Guthrie, Dylan traveled to New York City in January 1961. He survived the bitter cold by playing small venues and slept on couches in Greenwich Village, the epicenter of the emerging folk revival. When he eventually went to see Guthrie, who was in the hospital with Huntington's illness, his perseverance paid off. Dylan often performed for him, taking in his narrative approach and socially minded lyrics. The folk scene immediately welcomed the grubby newcomer with a scratchy voice and unadulterated magnetism. He started doing shows at Café Wah. At Gertie's Folk City, he attracted the interest of influential people like music journalist Robert Shelton, who subsequently penned an acclaimed review that aided Dylan's career debut. Dylan's genuineness. He wasn't merely performing folk tunes, he was living them, set him apart. He went from being a little-known vagrant to becoming the most talked-about person in the underground folk music scene in months. Debut album release. Columbia Records released Bob Dylan's debut album on March 19, 1962. The album, which was recorded in 2 days with little production, served as an unvarnished and unadulterated introduction to Dylan's musical persona. Only 2 of the 13 tracks, Talkin' New York and Song to Woody, were original compositions. The other tracks were classic folk and blues tunes that Dylan had reworked uniquely. Classic songs like Man of Constant Sorrow were given new life by his scratchy voice, unusual phrasing, and skillful harmonica playing. Although the album showcased Dylan's folk roots, it did not sell well at first, earning him the nickname Hammond's Folly after producer John Hammond, who had signed him. There were mixed opinions among critics. Some dismissed his voice as raw, while others acknowledged the distinct genuineness of his delivery. Despite the album's lack of commercial success, it set the stage for Dylan's quick rise in the folk scene and demonstrated that he was more than another Guthrie copycat. Blowin' in the Wind. Blowin' in the Wind, included in his second album, The Freewheeling Bob Dylan, was released in 1963 and quickly became a civil rights song. The song's straightforward yet deep lyrics, which were written in 10 minutes at a Greenwich Village cafe, posed rhetorical queries regarding social justice, conflict, and peace. How many roads must he cross before you call a man was a strong statement that struck a deep chord during a time of anti-war demonstrations and racial inequity. The folk trio, Peter, Paul, and Mary's rendition of the song rocketed into the mainstream, peaking at number 2 on the Billboard charts, while Dylan's original album saw only modest success. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and other civil rights activists loved and sang the song during marches and rallies. "It ain't me that's blowin' in the wind," Dylan said, remaining modest about the song's significance. Nevertheless, the song cemented Dylan's status as a protest musician and a voice of his generation. The Times They Are A-Changin'. The Times They Are A-Changin' became one of Dylan's most defining songs in 1964 when he ultimately accepted his social critic role. The lyrics, which were written with a sense of urgency, cautioned older generations, politicians, and critics to either embrace the wave of change or risk being left behind. It was one of Dylan's most explicitly political songs, with lyrics like, "Come senators, congressmen, please heed the call," which speak directly to America's power structures. Later, anti-Vietnam War demonstrators adopted the song, which became a rallying cry throughout the civil rights movement. Even though it has a strong connection to protest movements, Dylan rejected the label of protest singer, refusing to fit into any category. Numerous musicians, including Bruce Springsteen and the Byrds, have sung the song due to its enduring popularity, and it continues to be a timeless hymn for movements calling for change. Electric controversy. One of the most notorious events in rock history is Dylan's performance at the Newport Folk Festival on July 25, 1965. Dylan shocked the folk purists in the audience by plugging in his electric guitar and starting to play Maggie's Farm while wearing a leather jacket and being accompanied by the Paul Butterfield Blues Band. Booing broke out, not only from folk traditionalists who felt that this was a betrayal of the movement, but also because of the hurriedly put-together band's subpar sound. According to tradition, Pete Seeger was so incensed that he threatened to use an axe to cut the cables, although this was later challenged. A pivotal moment in Dylan's career, his transition from a folk troubadour to a rock pioneer, occurred when he was asked to return to the stage after just 3 songs and performed an acoustic rendition of It's All Over Now, Baby Blue. It was a daring act that changed popular music's course forever. Like a Rolling Stone. Dylan's 6-minute anthem, Like a Rolling Stone, which was released on July 20, 1965, transformed rock music. Bruce Springsteen described the opening snare hit, played by session drummer Bobby Gregg, as the moment that kicked open the door to your mind. The lyrics, which describe the fall from grace of a privileged woman, were cutting, cynical, and unlike anything heard on the radio before. How does it feel? Dylan sneered, delivering one of the most famous choruses in music history. Columbia Records was initially hesitant to release the song because of its length, but after a DJ played it repeatedly on the radio, public demand skyrocketed, and the song peaked at number 2 on the Billboard charts and later at number 1 on Rolling Stone's list of the 500 greatest songs of all time. More than just a hit, it was a declaration of artistic freedom, demonstrating that popular music could be poetic and rebellious. Motorcycle accident. Dylan's life took a sudden and mysterious turn on July 29, 1966, when he crashed his Triumph motorcycle near his home in Woodstock, New York. No ambulance was called and no official medical records exist, but Dylan claimed to have suffered a broken neck and used the incident as an excuse to withdraw from the public eye, effectively pausing his meteoric career. Some speculate that Dylan exaggerated the severity of the crash to escape the chaos of stardom. In any case, it marked a significant shift in Dylan's life, resulting in a quieter, more introspective period of music making, allowing him to reconnect with his family and rediscover music on his terms. Woodstock retreat. Following his motorcycle accident, Dylan withdrew to Woodstock, New York, seeking solace in a quieter, more domestic lifestyle. Far from the chaos of his international fame, he focused on raising his children and rediscovering his love for music in a less commercialized way. During this time, he collaborated with the band, his longtime backing group, recording informal sessions that would later become known as the Basement Tapes. These recordings captured a more relaxed, rootsy sound that contrasted sharply with his earlier electric fury. Songs like I Shall Be Released and You Ain't Going Nowhere showcased Dylan's return to folk-inspired storytelling. While fans and record executives clamored for his return to the spotlight, Dylan resisted, embracing a slower-paced life. This period also saw him experimenting with country music, which later influenced his 1969 album, Nashville Skyline. The Woodstock retreat wasn't just an escape, it was a reinvention, proving that Dylan could walk away from the machine of fame and still shape the future of music. Family life. In 1965, in a secretive ceremony, Bob Dylan married Sarah Lowndes, a former model and secretary. The couple built a quiet family life away from the chaos of fame, raising 4 children, Jesse, Anna, Samuel, and Jacob. Dylan's relationship with Sarah profoundly influenced his music, inspiring heartfelt songs like Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands, a poetic tribute to her. Despite his rock star status, Dylan embraced fatherhood, often seen riding bikes with his children and enjoying everyday family moments. However, fame strained their marriage, and by the late 1970s, their relationship crumbled, culminating in a bitter divorce in 1977. Jacob Dylan followed in his father's footsteps, becoming the frontman of the rock band, the Wallflowers. Despite the turbulence, Dylan remained deeply connected to his children, once saying, "Being a father has meant more to me than the music." His private family life, often overshadowed by his public persona, remains one of the most intriguing aspects of his journey. Nashville Skyline. In April 1969, Nashville Skyline marked a dramatic departure from Dylan's folk and rock roots, embracing country music with a smooth, laid-back sound. The album shocked listeners with its style and Dylan's new voice, a mellow, crooning tone far removed from his raspy folk delivery. This transformation was evident in Lay Lady Lay, a sensual ballad that became a significant hit. Dylan's collaboration with Johnny Cash on Girl from the North Country was another standout moment, symbolizing a bridge between folk and country traditions. The album's cheerful tone reflected Dylan's contentment at the time, possibly influenced by his retreat to family life in Woodstock. Critics were divided. Some saw it as a brilliant reinvention, while others missed the rebellious edge of his earlier work. Regardless, Nashville Skyline proved Dylan's artistic versatility and willingness to defy expectations, solidifying his status as an artist who refused to be confined by any genre. 1971 Israel visit. In May 1971, as he was getting close to his 30th birthday, Dylan traveled to Israel with his wife, Sarah, and their kids in a low-key but significant trip that was a personal pilgrimage that reflected his deep but often conflicted connection to his Jewish heritage. He reportedly met Rabbi Meir Kahane, the founder of the controversial Jewish Defense League, although it is unclear how involved he was with him. Some saw the trip as Dylan seeking spiritual grounding, while others thought he was just reconnecting with his ancestry. The trip sparked speculation about Dylan's faith, as he had frequently remained evasive about his religious beliefs. It didn't immediately lead to religiously themed music, but it did foreshadow his later spiritual explorations, including his conversion to Christianity later in the decade. Knockin' on Heaven's Door. Written for Sam Peckinpah's 1973 film Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, Knockin' on Heaven's Door became one of Dylan's most evocative and well-known songs. It plays during the film's pivotal moment when a dying sheriff gasps his last breaths, adding emotional depth to the scene. The song's simple yet incredibly evocative lyrics, "Mama, take this badge off of me, I can't use it anymore," resonate with themes of mortality, redemption, and the passage of time. Despite its Western origins, the song transcended cinema and became a staple worldwide at funerals, protests, and times of reflection. Later, artists like Eric Clapton and Guns N' Roses covered it, each version taking on its meaning. Many fans view it as an early sign of Dylan's developing spiritual awareness, as the song's themes of transition and farewell correspond with his later religious transformation. Christian conversion. Dylan's life work took one of the most dramatic and contentious turns in late 1978 when a fan threw a silver cross onto the stage during a performance in San Diego. Dylan, drawn to the object for no apparent reason, picked it up and put it in his pocket. Later that night, in a hotel room in Tucson, he had what he later described as a profound spiritual awakening. He recalled feeling Jesus' literal presence in the room, an experience that shook him to his core. This marked the beginning of Dylan's conversion to Christianity, a transformation that would define his music for the next few years. Many fans and critics were perplexed. Dylan, once the voice of counterculture and rebellion, had embraced evangelical Christianity? The change was spiritual and artistic as soon as he started incorporating overt religious messages into his lyrics. His newfound faith would soon materialize as a daring, gospel-infused album. Spiritual mentorship. After his conversion, Dylan immersed himself in Christian teachings, joining the Vineyard Fellowship, an evangelical church in Reseda, California, where he attended intensive Bible study classes from January to March 1979, seeking to deepen his understanding of Jesus and Scripture. He was mentored by influential Christian teachers who helped him through this spiritual rebirth, and he became deeply involved, even evangelizing to his bandmates, urging them to join him in his faith. Dylan's involvement with the Vineyard Church was not a passing phase. He was reportedly baptized in a swimming pool, symbolizing his commitment to Christ, and this period had a significant influence on his songwriting, as his upcoming album, Slow Train Coming, would reflect his religious convictions. Some saw Dylan's conversion as real, while others saw it as a phase or even a marketing gimmick. But either way, it was evident that, at least for this chapter of his life, Dylan's faith was unwavering. Slow Train Coming. Slow Train Coming, Dylan's first album with a purely Christian theme, was released in August 1979 and marked a radical break from his previous work. With songs like Gotta Serve Somebody, Dylan urged listeners to make a moral decision between good and evil. Produced by the legendary soul and gospel musician Jerry Wexler, the album featured polished instrumentation with an intense blues and gospel influence. Dylan's lyrics were unabashedly evangelical, proclaiming his newfound faith with lines like, "The devil, born already, ruined, blinded me." Although some longtime fans felt alienated by this drastic change, the album received critical acclaim, demonstrating that Dylan's artistry remained intact even as his subject matter changed. Songs like When He Returns and Precious Angel carried an emotional intensity that made it clear that this was no experiment. This was a man who genuinely believed he had been reborn. Grammy recognition. Despite the controversy surrounding his Christian phase, Dylan's religious music was commercially and critically successful. In 1980, he won the Grammy Award for Best Rock Vocal Performance, Male, for Gotta Serve Somebody. This was a significant moment in his career because it was his first Grammy win, demonstrating that even his most controversial work could be recognized by the general public. Dylan accepted the award very humbly. And even though he didn't make an overtly religious speech, his music spoke for itself. The song itself, with its potent message, "It may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody," became an anthem for spiritual reflection, though not everyone embraced it. John Lennon famously parodies it with his song, "Serve Yourself." Saved album. Released in June 1980, Saved was Dylan's second explicitly Christian album following Slow Train Coming. The gospel influence was even more pronounced this time, with soulful backing vocals, organ-heavy arrangements, and lyrics that left no ambiguity about Dylan's faith. Songs like Pressing On and In the Garden were pure declarations of devotion, making it clear that Dylan was not merely experimenting with religion, he was fully immersed in it. However, the album's reception was mixed. While devout Christian listeners praised its sincerity, many fans and critics were put off by its overt preaching. Rolling Stone even called it his most unlistenable album. Despite this, Dylan performed these songs with unmatched conviction during his live shows, treating his concerts like revival meetings. The album's failure to achieve the success of its predecessor suggested that the religious phase of his career was beginning to lose steam. However, Dylan remained committed to his faith for a little longer. Shot of Love. Released in August 1981, Shot of Love marked the final installment of Dylan's explicitly Christian trilogy, though it began blending religious themes with more secular subjects. The album retained the gospel elements of its predecessors, but also incorporated blues and rock influences, making it a more diverse listening experience. One of its most celebrated tracks, Every Grain of Sand, stands as one of Dylan's most significant spiritual reflections, haunted, poetic, and deeply personal. The song has been compared to the works of William Blake, capturing the fragility of human existence and the presence of the divine in everyday life. While still rooted in faith, Shot of Love was less dogmatic than Saved, signaling a transition from purely evangelical themes. However, critics remained divided, some calling it a return to form, and others feeling his religious messaging still weighed it down. The album began Dylan's slow re-embrace of broader lyrical themes beyond Christianity. Fan reactions. Many of Dylan's longtime fans found his newfound religious fervor challenging to accept, and many resented the fact that he had abandoned the protest songs that once defined him and instead seemed to be preaching at them. Hecklers would shout requests for older hits at concerts, only to be ignored. Dylan also gained a new audience, Christian listeners who saw his conversion as a powerful testament to faith. While some critics have argued that Dylan's gospel period was among the most passionate and sincere of his career, with him pouring his heart and soul into his performances like never before, it was indisputable that this phase caused one of the most significant rifts in his fan base. For the first time, Dylan had divided his audience not with his political views, but with his religious beliefs, igniting debates that still exist today. Live performances. Dylan's concerts during his Christian period were unlike anything he had done before. Instead of playing his greatest hits, he exclusively performed gospel songs from his religious albums, sometimes interspersing them with spoken messages about his faith. At one show, he told the audience, "Jesus is coming back, and he's coming back soon." This evangelistic approach did not sit well with many concert-goers. Some fans walked out, while others shouted in frustration when he refused to play classics like "Blowin' in the Wind." Yet those who embraced his gospel era described these concerts as electrifying, with Dylan performing with an intensity and conviction rarely seen in his career. His backing singers, deeply rooted in gospel traditions, added a soulful power to his live performances. Though divisive, this period of Dylan's live shows was arguably one of his most deeply felt. By 1981, he had begun reincorporating some of his older material, signaling that change was again on the horizon. Return to secular themes. By 1983, Dylan's music had shifted away from overtly religious themes. His faith had not vanished, but he was no longer preaching through his music as he had in the late 70s. His album, Infidels, which blended spiritual introspection with more general topics like geopolitics, morality, and personal struggles, signaled this shift. Some have speculated that Dylan, while still believing in God, was starting to question the rigidity of organized religion. He no longer spoke as an evangelist, but rather as a seeker, someone navigating the complexities of faith rather than standing firm in a single doctrine. He never explicitly denounced his Christian phase, but he stopped performing many of his gospel songs live in favor of older material and new compositions that covered a wider range of themes. This change relieved many longtime fans who had struggled with his religious output, while newer fans who had discovered him through gospel music were left wondering where his faith truly stood. Infidels album. In October 1983, Infidels was hailed as Dylan's best album in years. Produced by Mark Knopfler of Dire Straits, it featured a polished sound and lyrics that tackled weighty themes such as war, corruption, and personal redemption. The album contained tracks like Joker Man, a cryptic poetic song many believe reflects Dylan's evolving religious outlook, less evangelical and more introspective. Another standout track, Neighborhood Bully, was seen as an unapologetic defense of Israel, reinforcing his renewed connection to Jewish roots. Infidels was also notable for what it left out. Dylan recorded Blind Willie McTell, an astonishing blues tribute to the legendary musician, but inexplicably left it off the final album. The omission baffled fans and critics, though the song was later released on the Bootleg series. With Infidels, Dylan proved he was still capable of reinvention, crafting an album that resonated with old fans who had drifted away and new listeners drawn to its sharp lyrical commentary. Revisiting Judaism. By the middle of the 1980s, Dylan had begun to reestablish his connection to his Jewish roots. Following years of openly associating with Christianity, he resumed discreetly attending Jewish events, most notably his attendance at his son's bar mitzvahs, which demonstrated that, despite his Christian faith, he had never entirely given up his Jewish identity. At this time, Dylan also joined the Kabad Lubavitch movement, a Hasidic Jewish outreach group. Although he never publicly identified as a member of the movement, he was spotted at their events, and his involvement with Jewish spirituality became more apparent. Some conjectured that Dylan had never wholly left Judaism, but instead had undergone a profound spiritual exploration. By returning to his roots, he embraced the complexity of his religious identity, embodying both Jewish and Christian influences in his life. Kabad telethon appearances. Dylan's renewed ties to Judaism gained more visibility when he appeared unexpectedly on the Kabad telethon in 1989 and 1991, playing harmonica with other musicians and supporting Jewish charities and causes. His appearances sent a powerful message. Dylan, previously a Christian evangelist, was now openly embracing his Jewish heritage again. These appearances were especially striking, given how private Dylan was. Some saw them as evidence that his Christian phase was over, while others thought he was just blending the two religions in his way. In any case, his involvement with Kabad showed a transparent reconnection to his Jewish identity, adding yet another layer to Dylan's mysterious spiritual journey, leaving fans and academics to speculate about the true nature of his beliefs. Oh Mercy. Oh Mercy, which was released in September 1989, was considered by many to be Dylan's best album of the decade. Produced by Daniel Lanois, the album had a dark, atmospheric quality with deeply introspective lyrics that reflected on love, faith, and the passing of time. Songs like Ring Them Bells hinted at spiritual themes. Still more subtly and poetically than his gospel-era work, Man in the Long Black Coat carried an eerie, almost apocalyptic tone, leading some to interpret it as another reflection on Dylan's complicated relationship with faith. Dylan was no longer making overtly religious statements. He was now painting abstract, evocative images that left room for interpretation. The album was a critical success, demonstrating that Dylan's songwriting genius had not diminished, and it laid the groundwork for his incredible career resurgence in the 1990s. Time Out of Mind. By the mid-1990s, many people thought Dylan's best creative days were over. But in 1997, he released Time Out of Mind, a haunting and atmospheric album that changed the course of his career. Produced by Daniel Lanois, the album featured a raw, weathered sound that perfectly complemented Dylan's gravelly voice, which had become even more textured with age. Songs like Not Dark Yet and Lovesick explored themes of mortality, loneliness, and redemption, and resonated deeply with listeners. The melancholic tone of the album was heightened by Dylan's recent survival of a life-threatening heart infection, which many speculated contributed to its introspective nature. Time Out of Mind was a huge success, winning Dylan 3 Grammy Awards, including Album of the Year, and demonstrating that he was still a formidable force in modern music. Love and Theft. Love and Theft was released on September 11, 2001, a day of unfathomable tragedy, but it still caught the attention of both critics and fans. Unlike the dark, brooding Time Out of Mind, this album was playful, eclectic, and full of life. Dylan embraced various American musical traditions, from blues to ragtime to country, creating a rich and textured sonic landscape. Songs like Mississippi and High Water for Charlie Patton demonstrated his storytelling skills, combining humor, irony, and historical allusions. The album's title itself was a reference to a book on American minstrelsy, reflecting Dylan's deep immersion in the nation's musical legacy. Love and Theft was hailed as one of Dylan's finest works, demonstrating his ability to stay relevant and change with the times. Even at 60 years old, he was still an innovator, effortlessly fusing the past with the present in a way that felt both timeless and fresh. Autobiography release. In 2004, Dylan surprised the world with the release of Chronicles, Volume 1, a memoir that offered a rare glimpse into his life and creative process. However, in true Dylan fashion, it was far from a conventional autobiography. Instead of following a chronological structure, the book jumped between different moments in his career, focusing on unexpected periods like his early days in New York and his lesser-explored 80s era. What made Chronicles so captivating was his intimate, almost stream-of-consciousness style. Dylan reflected on everything from literary influences to obscure musicians who shaped his artistry. He remained elusive about specific details, leaving as many mysteries as he revealed. But his prose was rich and poetic, proving that his gift for language extended far beyond songwriting. The book was a critical and commercial success, earning comparisons to classic American literature. Fans eagerly awaited Volume 2, though as of today, it remains unreleased, adding to the mythos of Dylan's storytelling. Modern times. By the mid-2000s, Dylan's legendary status had been solidified, but he wasn't content to sit back and enjoy his success. In 2006, he released Modern Times, a record that blended folk, blues, and rock nostalgically and innovatively. The album debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200, making Dylan the oldest artist to do so at 65. The album's lyrics explored themes of desire, struggle, and time passing, with songs like Thunder on the Mountain and Ain't Talkin' exploring these themes. Some critics pointed out the album's resemblance to early blues songs, which sparked debates about Dylan's long-standing practice of musical borrowing. Despite this, Modern Times was widely hailed as another late-career success, demonstrating that Dylan wasn't just a relic of the past, he was still shaping the present. Nobel Prize in Literature. The world responded to Dylan's 2016 Nobel Prize in Literature with awe, surprise, and in some quarters, controversy. The Swedish Academy recognized Dylan for having created new poetic expressions within the great American song tradition, a recognition of his lyrical genius and profound cultural impact. Still, some critics question whether a songwriter should receive an award traditionally given to novelists and poets. Dylan remained characteristically enigmatic. He didn't immediately acknowledge the honor and skipped the official ceremony, instead sending a speech that paid homage to literary giants like Homer and Shakespeare. Dylan's acceptance of the award confirmed what fans had long known. Dylan wasn't just a musician. He was a literary giant whose words had shaped generations. The prize was a historic moment, making Dylan the first musician to receive the honor and further blurring the distinction between song and poetry. Continued touring. Dylan never slowed down, even though he was one of the most celebrated artists in history. His never-ending tour, which started in 1988, became a defining feature of his later career. While other legends of his caliber performed only on special occasions, Dylan played over 100 shows annually, making each performance a unique experience. He constantly reinterpreted his songs, sometimes making them nearly unrecognizable from their original versions, challenging audiences to engage with his music in new ways. His band was tight, his set lists were unpredictable, and his voice, despite becoming more raspy, had a raw power that gave every performance a sense of urgency. Even into the 2020s, Dylan remained dedicated to the road, embodying the restless spirit that had defined his career. He performed with the same intensity in large arenas or small theaters, proving that music wasn't just a career for him. Artistic endeavors. Beyond music, Dylan expressed himself through painting, sculpture, and visual art. He had always sketched on the road, but in the 2000s, his artwork gained widespread recognition, leading to international exhibitions. His paintings often depicted rural landscapes, cityscapes, and portraits, capturing the exact raw authenticity in his music. His most notable works include the Drawn Blank series, The Beaten Path, and the Retrospectrum, showcasing his evolution as a painter. His sculptures, often made from welded iron, reflected his fascination with industrial Americana. Many critics noted that Dylan's visual art mirrored his songwriting. Both were deeply rooted in history, storytelling, and a sense of place. His success in the art world proved that his creativity was boundless. Whether through lyrics, melodies, or brushstrokes, Dylan continued to reinvent himself. His artistic pursuits were yet another testament to his restless spirit, always searching for new ways to express his vision. Rough and Rowdy Ways. Dylan's first album of original material in 8 years, Rough and Rowdy Ways, was released in 2020, and it was nothing short of a revelation. At the age of 79, he delivered a masterwork full of historical references, poetic imagery, and reflections on mortality. The album's lead single, Murder Most Foul, was an epic 17-minute meditation on the assassination of JFK and the cultural shifts that followed. At the same time, other tracks such as I Contain Multitudes demonstrated Dylan's ability to weave personal musings with grand historical themes. Critics praised the album, comparing it to his best work, showing that even in his 8th decade, Dylan was still pushing artistic boundaries and engaging with the world profoundly and unexpectedly. Rough and Rowdy Ways wasn't just an album, it was a statement. Dylan was still here, still observing, still challenging, and still writing the soundtrack to America's ever-evolving story. Philosophical Reflections. Bob Dylan has always been enigmatic, weaving spiritual and philosophical themes into his work without clear explanations. In a rare 2022 interview, he candidly expressed his beliefs. I believe in damnation and salvation, as well as predestination. This remark reinforced the depth of his lifelong engagement with existential and religious questions. Unlike many artists who separate their personal beliefs from their work, Dylan has never shied away from allowing his evolving faith to influence his music. His perspective on destiny versus free will has shaped songs like Shelter from the Storm and Ring Them Bells, where divine intervention and human frailty coexist. This interview provided insight into Dylan's worldview, but true to form, he left more questions than answers. His philosophical musings continue to captivate scholars and fans alike, offering layers of meaning to be unpacked, much like the poetic ambiguity that defines his most significant works. Legacy and influence. Few musicians have had such a profound and far-reaching impact. His influence is not limited to folk and rock, but also reaches into gospel, blues, country, and even jazz. His legacy is distinctive because he boldly incorporated religious and philosophical themes into popular music, something that many artists were afraid to do. His impact also extends into literature, as his 2016 Nobel Prize in Literature cemented his status as a poetic force. Dylan's ability to blend deeply personal faith with universal human experiences has made him a figure of endless fascination. His songs aren't just musical compositions, but historical, cultural, and spiritual artifacts that continue to shape the artistic landscape. Personal spirituality. Bob Dylan has always kept his spiritual life private, making his 2022 interview especially significant. He openly declared, "I'm a religious person. I read the scriptures, meditate and pray, light candles in church." This admission reflected an eclectic approach to faith, blending elements of Judaism and Christianity. He elaborated, "The 5 books of Moses, Pauline epistles, invocation of the saints, all of it." This statement suggests that rather than adhering strictly to one religious doctrine, Dylan's faith is a personal synthesis of different traditions. His music has often mirrored this spiritual duality. Albums like Slow Train Coming embrace Christian salvation, while later works hint at Jewish mysticism. His reflections highlight a man still searching, questioning, and engaged with existence's profound mysteries. Unlike many public figures who simplify their beliefs for clarity, Dylan embraces complexity, making his spiritual journey as intricate and compelling as his music. Tempest album. One of Dylan's most ambitious albums, Tempest, was released in 2012 and was full of dark and evocative storytelling. The album's 14-minute title track about the Titanic disaster is a haunting meditation on fate, chaos, and human fragility, with Dylan painting a cinematic portrait of the doomed voyage. Elsewhere, Roll On John is a heartfelt tribute to John Lennon, referencing his friendship and Lennon's broader impact on the world. Tempest was notable for its rich historical references and the way it blended elements of folk, blues, and balladry. However, as history has shown, Dylan had no intention of slowing down, and Tempest was just another chapter in his ever-evolving musical legacy. Shadows in the Night. Few people anticipated that Bob Dylan would tackle Frank Sinatra's songs by 2015, but Shadows in the Night demonstrated that Dylan could turn any genre into something wholly original. Dylan replaced the orchestral majesty of Sinatra's original songs with a bare, gloomy tone while covering timeless American standards like Stay With Me and Autumn Leaves. As a result, Dylan's album had a personal feel, as though he were singing alone in a dark room while reflecting. These songs felt more like intimate confessions than well-rehearsed performances because of the tenderness his aged voice brought. Dylan used these songs to dwell on love, grief, and desire in a way that only someone with a lifetime of experience could, according to some critics who characterized the album as Dylan facing his death. Dylan reinterpreted these masterpieces through his perspective, prioritizing their emotional essence over their original grandeur, instead of copying Sinatra. The album was an innovation rather than a tribute, demonstrating that Dylan could still astound listeners in his 70s. By bridging the gap between rock and traditional pop with Shadows in the Night, he showed his profound regard for America's musical heritage while making it eerily current. Fallen Angels. Dylan's investigation of the Great American Songbook resumed in 2016 with Fallen Angels, following the success of Shadows in the Night. This album demonstrated Dylan's profound respect for the heyday of American songwriting by reimagining classics like Melancholy Mood and It Had to Be You. A distinct aspect of Dylan's love for these classic songs was revealed in Fallen Angels, which had a lighter, more lighthearted spirit than its predecessor, which had a sad, reflective tone. Despite their rough edges, his vocals were warm and genuine, demonstrating that emotional honesty was more important than technical mastery. Critics initially questioned Dylan's entry into mid-century pop classics. However, they soon realized he wasn't merely covering songs, but saving them and giving long-forgotten melodies new life. The album gave the impression that Dylan reflected on a past period of American society, particularly music. Fallen Angels served as more evidence that Dylan was more than just a composer. He was a musical historian and a performer who was prepared to honor his heritage while continuing to advance his art. Triplicate. Triplicate was the big show if Fallen Angels and Shadows in the Dark were warm-ups. This triple CD, which was released in 2017, had 30 timeless American songs ranging from heartfelt ballads to lively swing tunes. A triple album of covers initially appeared to be an unusual choice, even for Dylan, but he took these tunes and made them his own again. Dylan's seasoned vocals conveyed the emotional impact of each song thanks to the understated yet impactful orchestration. Songs like Once Upon a Time and These Foolish Things struck a profound chord, as though Dylan were singing about faded memories and lost love while looking back on his history. His choice to release 3 complete cover discs demonstrated his intense dedication to this endeavor. It was not merely a creative digression, but a sincere desire to preserve America's pre-rock musical legacy. Triplicate was a reminder that Dylan's genius extended beyond songwriting and was found in his interpretation of the world, even as some fans longed for new original work. The record solidified his reputation as a famous musician and a history curator who connects generations with music. Rough and Rowdy Ways. Dylan's 2020 album, Rough and Rowdy Ways, marked his return to original music after an 8-year break, and it immediately established itself as one of his best late career works. The expansive 17-minute epic, Murder Most Foul, explored the assassination of JFK and the cultural changes that followed, fusing pop culture with historical references in a way that only Dylan could. At the same time, I Contain Multitudes featured Dylan at his most self-referential, nodding to everyone from Anne Frank to Edgar Allan Poe. The album was a meditation on mortality and a testament to Dylan's ability to remain relevant in a changing world. Dylan's voice still captivated, making every lyric feel like hard-earned wisdom. Rough and Rowdy Ways wasn't just a comeback, it was a masterclass in storytelling, proving that Dylan still had plenty to say, and more importantly, that people still wanted to listen. Artistic recognition. Bob Dylan's artistic legacy is reflected in a staggering array of accolades that span decades and genres. His 2016 Nobel Prize in Literature was a historic moment, the first time a songwriter had been recognized for literary contributions, but it was only one of many prestigious awards. In 2012, President Obama awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, acknowledging his profound influence on American culture. Dylan's music continues to be celebrated across generations, and his 10 Grammy Awards, including a Lifetime Achievement Award, add another level of artistic reach. His 2001 Oscar win for Wonder Boy's Things Have Changed further expanded his creative reach, and his induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1988 solidified his place among music's most esteemed figures. Despite Dylan's tendency to downplay his accolades, his influence is undeniable. Whether as a poet, musician, or cultural icon, these honors reflect his enormous impact on music, literature, and beyond. Influence on other artists. Bob Dylan's influence on music is immeasurable. His fearless approach to songwriting inspired Bruce Springsteen, who once said Dylan freed your mind the way Elvis freed your body. Joni Mitchell admired his poetic depth, while Leonard Cohen, often compared to Dylan, acknowledged him as a transformative figure. The Beatles were profoundly impacted by Dylan's introspective lyrics, with John Lennon crediting him for inspiring a shift toward more personal and philosophical songwriting. His influence extends beyond folk and rock. Hip-hop artists like Kendrick Lamar and rock legends like U2 have drawn from Dylan's storytelling prowess. He also shaped punk and alternative rock, with Patti Smith and The Clash embracing his rebellious spirit. Even modern-day artists like Taylor Swift and Ed Sheeran have cited Dylan as a lyrical inspiration. His ability to challenge conventions musically and thematically has encouraged generations of artists to experiment, evolve, and use their voices for social commentary and self-expression. Literary contributions. Beyond music, Dylan's foray into literature showcases his restless creativity. His 1971 book, Tarantula, was an experimental, free-form blend of poetry and prose, echoing the fragmented, surrealist style of the Beat generation. Though initially met with mixed reactions, it has since been recognized as a fascinating glimpse into Dylan's unconventional storytelling. His 2004 memoir, Chronicles, Volume 1, took a different approach, offering a vivid, introspective account of his life. Unlike typical autobiographies, Dylan avoided a chronological retelling, instead diving into pivotal moments that shaped his artistry. The book became a bestseller, praised for its poetic yet candid writing, and left fans eagerly awaiting the still unreleased second volume. Dylan's lyrics have also been studied in academic settings, with his words regarded as modern poetry. In 2016, the Nobel Prize in Literature Committee highlighted his ability to create new poetic expressions within the great American song tradition, affirming what fans already knew. Dylan's words are as powerful on paper as they are in song. Visual artistry. Bob Dylan's artistic expression isn't confined to words and music. His passion for painting and drawing has been a lifelong pursuit. His artwork, primarily kept private for years, was first exhibited publicly in 1994 and has since gained international recognition. His Drawn Blank series, inspired by sketches from his travels, showcased his vibrant, impressionistic style. Over time, his visual art evolved, leading to acclaimed exhibitions like The Beaten Path, 2016, which depicted American landscapes, diners, and desolate highways, reminiscent of his songwriting themes. His paintings often echo the mood of his lyrics, some stark and desolate, others bursting with color and movement. His work has been displayed in prestigious galleries, including the National Portrait Gallery in London. Dylan has also ventured into sculpture, working with iron to create intricate, rustic gates. Dylan's creative output remains vast and ever-evolving through song, literature, or visual art, proving that his artistic vision knows no bounds. The Never-Ending Tour. Dylan began the Never-Ending Tour in 1988, a relentless tour of live performances for over 3 decades. Dylan has remained dedicated to the road, often playing over 100 shows annually, and his performances are legendary for their unpredictable nature. Set lists change nightly, and he constantly reinvents his songs, sometimes making them nearly unrecognizable from their studio versions. While some fans long for his classic arrangements, others appreciate his refusal to stagnate. The tour has taken Dylan to intimate theaters, large arenas, and unexpected venues, demonstrating that his connection with live audiences is still a driving force. His dedication to the stage is almost legendary, reflecting the nomadic troubadour persona that has shaped much of his music. Dylan continues to tour well into his 80s, showing no sign of slowing down, a testament to his unwavering passion for performing. Adaptation to changing times. One of Bob Dylan's greatest strengths is his ability to evolve with the times without losing his essence. In the 1960s, he revolutionized folk music before shocking audiences by going electric. When critics doubted his ability to stay relevant in the 1980s, he responded with a spiritual transformation and a critically acclaimed return to blues and roots music. In the 2000s, he embraced modern production with albums like Modern Times, while in 2020, Rough and Rowdy Ways showed he could still captivate audiences with profound storytelling. Dylan has also adapted to technological shifts. Despite his old-school persona, he was one of the earliest major artists to embrace streaming platforms and digital releases. He has continually reinterpreted his songs to fit new generations, ensuring his music remains vital. Whether through his sound, lyrics, or his reinvention of performance styles, Dylan has always stayed ahead of the curve, proving that true artistry knows no expiration date. Influence of the Torah. Biblical imagery abounds in Bob Dylan's songs, frequently using the Torah and the Old Testament to inform his narratives. The tale of Abraham and Isaac is reinterpreted in songs like Highway 61 Revisited, which combine social critique and irony. Jimi Hendrix's well-known rendition of All Along the Watchtower, based on Isaiah chapter 21, depicts a vision of upcoming transformation and divine reckoning. Dylan's conception of faith remained firmly anchored in Jewish scripture even during his gospel time. In interviews, he has often stated that he studies the 5 books of Moses, and his frequent use of religious analogies points to a deep affinity with these writings. While every grain of sand is a beautiful, almost Job-like reflection on fate and divine will, Jokerman references the messianic prophecies. Dylan's music transcends decades by skillfully incorporating these biblical allusions into contemporary stories, giving timeless ideas a sense of immediacy and relevance. Dylan's ongoing usage of imagery from the Torah demonstrates that, for him, the pursuit of truth frequently starts with the holy writings of his forefathers, enhancing his unique status as a poet and spiritual seeker of the contemporary era. Interest in Kabbalah. Bob Dylan has demonstrated an interest in spiritual mysticism throughout his career, and there have been hints that he studied Kabbalah, the obscure area of Jewish philosophy. Dylan's lifelong quest for meaning aligns with Kabbalah's emphasis on cosmic connections, hidden meanings within the Torah, and a greater comprehension of divine energies. Although he has never publicly acknowledged that he studied Kabbalah in depth, rumors exist that he was impacted by its teachings, especially in the 1980s and later. His songs frequently allude to fate, divine intervention, and metaphysical ideas. Dylan invokes the Kabbalistic concept of the hidden tzaddik in Man in the Long Black Coat, a good person whose influence is significant, but whose existence is frequently overlooked. Some academics contend that his rich symbolism and cryptic storytelling resemble a Kabbalistic approach, where truths are concealed under the surface, just waiting to be uncovered. His concern in prophecy and destiny is also consistent with Kabbalistic theory. Dylan is a fascinating person at the nexus of spiritual philosophy and music because of his poetic lyricism and lifelong fascination with religious riddles. The spiritual atmosphere that has surrounded him for decades is enhanced by the influence of Kabbalah, whether or not he studied it properly. Return to Jewish practices. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, Dylan was seen attending Jewish services again, leading many to speculate that he had reconnected with his Jewish roots after his Christian phase. He was spotted at Kabad Lubavitch gatherings, an Orthodox Jewish movement known for emphasizing Jewish learning, mysticism, and outreach. Some accounts suggest he even participated in traditional Jewish prayers and festivals. In a rare moment of candid acknowledgement, Dylan reportedly visited the Western Wall in Jerusalem, an important site for Jewish worship. While he never publicly renounced Christianity, his re-engagement with Jewish customs and spiritual practices suggests an evolving relationship with his heritage. Dylan's approach to religion has never been conventional. He resists labels, preferring to explore faith on his terms. His return to Jewish traditions highlights a lifelong spiritual journey rather than a rigid adherence to one belief system, making his story as complex and compelling as his music. Private nature of faith. Bob Dylan has always been intensely private about his personal beliefs, choosing instead to let his music and lyrics express his spiritual reflections. Unlike many musicians who use their platform to advocate for religious or philosophical movements, Dylan often dodges direct questions about his faith in interviews. When asked about his beliefs, he is given vague or enigmatic responses, reinforcing the idea that faith, for him, is a profoundly personal and ever-evolving journey. His gospel albums from the late 1970s and early 1980s were seen as a public embrace of Christianity, yet his subsequent works contained strong Jewish influences. This duality has led to endless speculation about where he truly stands religiously. Rather than making definitive statements, Dylan has allowed his songs to serve as theological musings, filled with parables, prophecies, and moral inquiries. His reluctance to define his beliefs reflects a broader philosophy that faith is fluid, mysterious, and ultimately something to be discovered rather than explained. Legacy of religious exploration. One of the most fascinating aspects of Bob Dylan's legacy is his relentless search for spiritual truth. Unlike many public figures who adhere to one faith, Dylan's journey has constantly evolved from his Jewish upbringing to his Christian phase to his later reconnection with Judaism, and possibly even influences from Kabbalah and other mystical traditions. His music reflects this restless spiritual inquiry, tackling redemption, prophecy, fate, and morality themes. Albums like Slow Train Coming, 1979, capture his gospel era, while Infidels, 1983, reaffirms his connection to Judaism. His later works, including Rough and Rowdy Ways, 2020, grapple with existential questions and biblical allegories. Dylan's legacy isn't about promoting a singular religious doctrine, but embracing the mystery of faith. His willingness to question, evolve, and explore makes him not just a musical legend, but also a profound philosophical figure, a man forever searching for meaning through song.
If you've watched the video till here, that means you've enjoyed the video. Subscribe. Don't forget to turn on the notifications bell icon